Well, okay, I'm really here with Dr. Erin Mitchell. I've been really excited and looking forward to this episode. And I'm very grateful, Erin, for taking time of your busy schedule to join us on Healthcare Unfiltered. I have followed your work. I've told you before we went on the air, I'm a big fan of your work and really commitment to what you're doing. But just for folks who are listening and tuning in maybe for the first time, a little bit about you and who you are and what you do day in and day out at Memorial Sloan Kettering.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you for the invite. And I'm a big fan. I've listened from back to the Outspoken Oncology days. So it's good to be here. So I am a medical oncologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering. My time is somewhat clinical, but focused primarily on research in the health services / health policy space. I think I went into medical school initially thinking I was going to be doing either basic science or clinical translational research, but then really found my way into the health policy world pretty quickly, reading a health policy blog, which some of your viewers may recognize, called The Incidental Economist. It was kind of blew up during the Obamacare debates and passage. And that's really when it started to catch my eye as well. So I decided towards the end of medical school that I felt like the biggest impact that I could make, and also where my interests lay, was in working in healthcare policy and trying to fix our system at the system level. So then that was at NYU. From NYU, I went to UNC Chapel Hill and Duke for my training. And then, Peter Bach is now my main mentor here at Memorial Sloan Kettering in his health outcomes research group, where I've been for about 3 years and came here directly from fellowship. So this is my first real job, as people like to say. So I do, on the clinical side, I focus in genitourinary malignancies. I would say almost all of my clinical volume ends up being prostate cancer, although I do see some bladder patients, and but between those two disease types is my focus. And then my clinical research, my health services research has really focused in several topics. One has been conflicts of interest between oncologists and doctors more broadly and the drug and device industry. Another focus has been the value and the cost effectiveness of cancer drugs. And another area that is also pretty broad, but I've had a few specific studies in, is just what are the determinants of oncologist practice patterns? Like, what makes us do what we do? What drives our decisions between different drugs, different treatment options, with a specific eye towards the financial underpinnings of those decisions. So a lot of work in how different drugs get billed for, the reimbursement that physicians see or don't see as a result of their decision making, and what drugs they use, and how that can shape our decision making. Again, with an eye towards where the areas that the system is in need for some reform.
That's great. I share with you the more around the last interest about barriers as well as incentives to some behaviors. And I've been fascinated by the field of behavioral economics. I'm sure you have as well, and I've read a lot of books on it because I do think there's a clear intersection there. But Erin, when you say you do health policy, for a policy researcher, what type of training does a policy researcher need to have? And I ask that because you're a medical oncologist, right? And there are obviously many policy researchers who probably can write similar to what you write, but may not be trained in oncology. Is there specific training, a course, other fellowship that you need to do to, I don't know, to gain credibility in the policy world?
Yeah. Sure. So for me, it was a master's of public health. I feel like that for me was very critical in getting the skill set that I have. And I did that while I was at UNC Chapel Hill. That was one of the reasons why I chose to go to that school, because they have a really good school of public health. So even while I was doing my clinical training in oncology, I was able to complete that a 2-year degree in that during the time I was during my research time and lower clinical burden time, so to speak. So there are a couple of routes that one could take if doing that kind of training. Like most schools of public health will have a Department of Health Policy and Management. The HPM is the usual abbreviation. I actually didn't do that because what I felt I needed the most was a methodologic skill set. And so my training and my MPH focused on epidemiology and biostatistics. So in the study design, observational study design, how to use data, how to manage large data sets such as Medicare, SEER Medicare, because I had the expectation, which has come true, that that's where the bulk of my day-to-day research would be spent. So for me, I guess my training was much more methods focused and kind of, as I was seeing at foundational level, to be able to enable me to do the rest of it. And then the policy is all self-taught. Like that's all just I had to just read and catch up on my own. To be honest, there are a lot of areas in the specifics of Medicare and especially Medicaid policy that gets really labyrinthine in terms of the requirements that I think someone who had done a 2-year degree in health policy management would probably be more learned on those specifics than I am. And I've got more the biostats.
I'm glad you said about the self-taught as well as it kind of changes, because when I was in training, as well as even as a young faculty member, I actually was not that much interested in healthcare policy. I was more into clinical trials, novel therapies, and and then with time, as I got older, I became pretty interested in healthcare delivery and healthcare policy because, as you said, there's a lot of influence that you could do at a larger level when you really understand the topic and hopefully try to make an impact. So, Aaron, I invited you to the show because I thought we want to talk a little bit about the FDA and branch out from the FDA into various topics of your interest as well. And really what sparked this, although we're going to talk more broadly than one particular item, is the recent approval of a drug for Alzheimer's disease, Edu something. It's an antibody, whatever it is. But basically, it's a drug that was approved by the FDA that clearly, everybody was upset about the approval. But there has been many prior incidents where people have been upset about FDA approval. So, I think, it wasn't anything new, but there was a little bit more of a crying out loud with this one than usually done. So I thought it's a good opportunity to talk more broadly about the FDA and some of the approval issues. You've been critical in some of these things, and me and you have had some discussions about this. We've disagreed about certain things as well. And then we will probably allude from this into this Alzheimer's disease and really the impact on this. And then I want to try to also cover some of the conflict of interest as well. I think you've done amazing work with that, actually. Some of your papers are definitely influential. So let's start with the FDA. So I want to throw a suggestion to you, and I wanted to react to it. So there's one school of thought that says the FDA should not be a barrier. They should in fact lower the standards to allow more drugs come into market, to allow access to drugs. And then you, as the physician, as the oncologist, you have the drug available, you make an informed decision for that patient whether to use that drug or not. And the FDA should not police it. They want to make it available. And nobody is forcing you to prescribe it. You still don't need to prescribe the drug, but so on. The other philosophy is, no, the FDA should be the police, because once the drug is approved, it's like haywire, right? Everybody's going to approve it. You can't really control it, and many patients could receive unnecessary drug. Take us through your thought process about this, because I'm sure you've heard those two schools of thought.
Mm-hmm. I would say I'm probably as far into the second school of thought as you could get. That probably comes as no surprise. I think that's
I knew that.
You asked me. Yep. I think that's why you asked me to come on here. And even where to start, I was thinking about my response and thinking that you probably be asking me some version of that question. So I have a few things. as a clinician, so you use the words shared decision making or informed decision making. I think we'll have to go back and listen to the tape, but I think I want to say informed decision making is what we said. As a clinician, I feel that true informed decision making on my part and the part of the patient, the shared decision making, let's say, by necessity rests on a strong evidence base. And if I don't have a strong evidence base, then I really can't make an informed decision, or the patient that I'm teaching about their disease can't make an informed decision. There's nothing that I would rather nothing that I would hate to say more to patients, and I do have to say this on occasion, which is this drug might help you, or there is some evidence that suggests that it might help you. I want to be able to say, like, this is going to help you. I think that's what patients want to hear. And I feel conflicted and really unsure about whether my recommendation is helping the patient when I am making a recommendation to them that I know is based on suggestion, but not definitive benefit. And so what do I mean by suggested benefit? I think that can mean a lot of different things in different cases. It can mean an approval based on a flawed trial. It can mean an approval or an accelerated approval based on a preliminary endpoint that may or may not correlate with longer term benefit. It can in some cases mean a well done trial with a proven drug that patient just doesn't fit the eligibility criteria for very well. Like, there's a lot of reasons that it can cause us to be unsecure or feel unconfident about a recommendation or a treatment as we're discussing with an individual patient. And I see that the number one way to avoid that is to generate definitive evidence of benefits prior to that, like prior to the time that we are then as clinicians placed in the position of making a yes or no recommendation to our patients.
But, and I think you articulated that very nicely, appreciate that. But one of the things that puzzles me sometimes is population science versus individual science. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. So, a lot of times when you have a clinical trial, you're having patients that, obviously clearly, when you show a drug that is benefiting a patient population, even based on a randomized control trial, the patient that you're seeing in your clinic may still not benefit from that drug. I mean, the randomized control trial showed drug A is better than drug B, hazard ratio, whatever it is, in patients with castrate-resistant prostate cancer. Mm-hmm. But for that patient that you're seeing, all what you can tell him is, I still think it's going to help. You can't really be certain it's going to help him, but you can say, based on this trial, I believe that your chances of being helped are better than the chances of not being helped based on that study. That's really all you can tell, because you really can't be certain it's going to help that specific patient.
Sure. Okay. So I think I can rephrase, if I'm understanding your distinction correctly, then to more fully state what I was saying or getting at before is, I would like to be able to definitively say to a patient that some patients benefit from this drug. But as a corollary to that, I think when we are approving drugs based on weak data or in some case surrogate endpoints, like, I can't say even that. I can't even say that I can say definitively it benefits someone. It may still be the case that it benefits no one. Right.
So then the question, going back to the FDA, whether they should police or the gatekeeper, is it the physician or the FDA? The FDA might come and say, in a broader patient population, the incremental benefit might be very, very small, but for individual patient, Dr. Mitchell might believe that this actually is going to help significantly because of other factors. If we make that drug available, then Dr. Mitchell can make that decision. I've heard that from some FDA officials, that they really don't want to be a barrier as much as possible to bringing drugs to market. They feel bringing access is really important. And then you get to decide if it's going to help that patient or not. But what you're saying is you can't even say that on an individual level.
Yeah, I think that a definitive benefit in a broad population or some population, I'd still say is prerequisite to being able to make individualized choices for patients. I think if we have a drug where that efficacy really hasn't been clearly established, then as a clinician, don't have really anything to stand on to say which of my patients may or may not have a a clinical benefit from it.
So should the FDA always mandate? We know they don't, but I think I've heard you say that we should really mandate overall survival benefit, randomized controlled studies, and we know this doesn't happen, and there are surrogate endpoints being used and all of that. Is it still plausible or possible, you think, to mandate overall survival benefit to approved drugs, or do you feel there are scenarios where you feel comfortable not demanding overall survival benefit?
So a few things. I do like overall survival, but I certainly would not say that it should always and forever be the only endpoint that we study. I think that it's the ideal endpoint when we are aiming to improve survival, but we also have to consider palliative endpoints and quality of life endpoints. And I think that if that is the goal of a drug, then those other endpoints can certainly be taken into account. Like, for example, you mentioned the Aduhelm approval. I think in that case, you could hypothesize that improving someone's Alzheimer's disease down the road is going to improve their survival. But I think it's totally reasonable, the endpoint that they chose in that study, which is a clinical endpoint of your dementia scale. What is your cognition? So I think in that case, a patient's cognition is a totally reasonable clinical endpoint. That's the thing you're trying to improve. I mentioned I treat bladder cancer. I think that there are, again, these would be more quality of life and palliative endpoints, but there's a lot of work right now in trying to change the management of muscle invasive bladder cancer and identify patients who can avoid a cystectomy. So if the goal of either a new drug or a new treatment strategy or paradigm is to avoid someone having to undergo that surgery, then maybe you look at their long-term survival as kind of a balancing measure to make sure you're not worsening it over the long term, but your shorter term is we want to see cystectomy-free survival. And since we know and cystectomy is such a morbid procedure and patients really hate to have it, that would be an acceptable quality of life endpoint for a study. So that's all kind of an aside, because I don't think I've exactly answered your question yet, which is, I think when the goal is to prolong survival, then yes, overall survival should be the eventual endpoint. The other caveat I would get, though, is I'm not opposed to the accelerated approval program as written, because I think that as written, it probably, at least to my eye, strikes the appropriate balance between the speed and the really definitive efficacy benefit that I want to see, which is allowing something into market when it is very promising based on surrogate endpoints, but then removing it from market if those are not borne out in terms of the longer term definitive endpoints, which I would say should be overall survival. I think that what I have an issue with is that accelerated approval as written and as enforced are two very different things. And we have a lot of drugs either getting approved on a surrogate and then never taken off market when either they don't do a confirmatory trial or the confirmatory trial outright fails, or drugs going straight to full approval on the basis of a surrogate endpoint and then never even having the requirement to look at a longer term outcome such as overall survival.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on the point of the Xrayed approval. I mean, I thought as as a regulatory pathway, it's actually a good pathway as long as you follow
Yeah.
the rules of law. Did you read the editorial that was written by Rick Pazder at the New England Journal of Medicine a couple of months ago, defending some of the Xrayed approval and I don't know if you did, but it was interesting. One of the things that struck me was Pazder from the representing the FDA was saying, well, even if the accelerated approval, if the confirmatory trial of the accelerated approval fails to demonstrate the benefit in the earlier study, we will still go back and have a discussion with the manufacturer because maybe there are certain issues in the design of the study or the statistical analysis or the population that was selected. And I thought that was completely out there because that decision is usually made pre-initiation of the confirmatory trial. You actually design the trial prior to the launch to demonstrate specifically the survival benefit that you promise you will show later on. So if you don't show it and you still have to go back and mine the data, eventually you'll find something. You keep mining it, you'll find something.
Yeah. Yeah. So I did not read that particular piece, or if I did, it has since slipped from my memory. But I think I couldn't agree with you more on that concern, which is yeah, I'll go out and say I think my larger cultural criticism of the FDA is that it currently seems oriented to find any way or construct any way they can to give industry an out, like to give them an out and still get the drug through. And I think Aduhelm was another good case of that, where they're willing to to wrangle their own rules and try and find some way to. It's almost like the decision to get something approved is predetermined absent the evidence, and then the interpretation of the trials or the design of future trials is then done with the known outcome of approval in mind.
So what is the, I mean, we're still talking on the FDA. What's your assessment of, first of all, ODAC in general, right? When it comes to assessing, drugs, and I mean, take us through how often the FDA relies, I guess, on their advisors to make a determination for approval or not. And clearly, at the example of Alzheimer's disease, they could care less about the advisors. And we know what happened afterwards with few folks resign and so forth. So if you can tell us how often you think the FDA relies on these external advisors in making these determinations, and maybe from there segue into why did they not listen to them this time? What was going on with Alzheimer's?
Oh, I feel like that question is on, both questions are a little bit empirical there. So I actually don't know offhand what we don't know all the facts. Times they agree. I would say that in general, the FDA overwhelmingly goes with what their advisory groups say. And I don't know the specific figures for ODAC, but my recollection of their figures in general is upwards of 90%. I think it's not for certain, but it is highly likely that council or advisory committee recommendations are followed. So in line with that, yes, it is a notable departure from a nearly unanimous vote against the Aduhelm approval that the FDA decided to approve the drug despite that.
So, I mean, any thoughts? Why would that be? I mean, obviously, we don't have any facts, clearly. I mean, it's like almost speculation, which nobody's going to hold us, obviously, accountable to this. But it's a little bit strange, right? Because like you said, I'll admit, I tried to figure out the percent of times that the FDA went against their advisors, and I couldn't find that publicly. But I don't know, like, what happened here, you think?
So there have been some report. Again, I don't know the background facts behind this, but it looks like, so if I were to tell myself a a story based on things that I do know about FDA interactions and how these and my understanding of how these happen is when you get to the stage of getting a fast track designation, and there are several different designations that the FDA gives for. There's the breakthrough therapy designation, accelerated approval, priority review. All of them have slightly different requirements and slightly different, let's say, benefits to the manufacturer. But Aduhelm got early in its development a fast track approval, and what that grants you by the legislation and the regulation that comes from it is, I think the terminology that FDA uses in their documents is, I'm using air quotes here, early and frequent interactions between or meetings between the FDA and industry in order to design the confirmatory trials, decide on what the endpoints are, decide on the accrual targets, et cetera. And so I think that it's a little bit like the financial conflict of interest story. People just kind of over time start to feel that they are on the same team. They start to believe in the drug product that they are in the process of regulating. I don't want to use something like a flippant phrase like, drink the Kool-Aid or something like that, but that's kind of what I'm saying. I think there's a cultural shift, and as you start to become more intimately involved and know the people on the manufacturer side, they seem nice, they seem hardworking, they seem to really believe what they're doing. You have preclinical studies looking at the efficacy. Then I think the role inevitably starts to shift from, are we going to really put down our foot in terms of a stringent regulatory requirement that may bar a therapy from the market, or maybe we start to believe in this too, and we'd like to both get this drug to approval because we think it probably works regardless of the outcomes of the trial that were equivocal, and we also really like these people and they've been so good and they've followed all of our rules and all of our suggestions over the course of this long, multi-year interaction, which we've had with them for the pre-IND phase. I think that's, and to sum it up in 2 words, regulatory capture.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think if I read correctly that the company has 9 years to complete the confirmatory trial.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's a lot. That's a decade.
Yeah, and in the meantime, I mean, it's a comparable amount of time to your pre-generic competitor life cycle, right? Like they've already kind of got their win, regardless of whether or not the drug ever achieves this in the confirmatory input, regardless of whether, even if it doesn't confirm clinical benefit down the road, if it's ever, regardless of whether it comes off the market like ideally it should, or even if it stays on the market regardless, they've already got a pretty good window in order to recoup expenses and make a lot of money.
I mean, isn't it also a precedent? Like, I mean, if I'm another manufacturer now and I saw this drug got approved based on this endpoint, there's nothing that's preventing me of working on another drug. The FDA can't say no to me right now because there's a precedent. They've approved that based on the endpoints, right? I mean, they can't say no to me.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but I think what you're hinting at is one of the most baffling arguments that I've heard, baffling to me, related to the Aduhelm approval, which is that by lowering the standard for initial approval, we're going to get more and better drugs down the road. And I think, to me, that's completely backwards. You don't. We're on the long road towards lowered FDA approvals, and it's not giving us, say, not stick with a specific disease type, but just overall, like, it's not giving us new cancer cures. Like, we had Gleevec 20 years ago, and now we're getting Aduhelm. Like, Aduhelm is I would say the result of that, and the result of a process of signaling to industry that they can get away with weaker and weaker clinical evidence. And when industry knows where the bar is, they're going to aim just above that bar. And if we set it low, then contrary to getting more and better drugs, we're going to be getting worse drugs or drugs with worse supporting evidence. So I see this as taking us in exactly the wrong direction, both in drug development overall, and then also with a reference to Alzheimer's.
I mean, to you as an oncologist who's done policy, who's been critical for some of the oncology issues, were you that surprised with the Alzheimer's disease? Like, were you, I know the non-oncologist world were kind of shocked, but were you surprised that much? Or are you saying, okay, we deal with oncology, with this in oncology all the time?
I was still surprised just because of how lopsided the advisory council vote was on Aduhelm, but I would say my guess is I was less surprised than a non-oncologist. I think that the tweet that I sent out expressing some of my like snarkiness and anger about this whole situation we're in was comparing the Aduhelm approval back to the approval of adjuvant sunitinib for high risk renal cell cancer after nephrectomy, which as I'm told, I don't think this has been empirically demonstrated yet, but it seems like this is fortunately not been a practice that's gotten a lot of hold in the oncology community. But I think that aside, to me, the FDA has a track record of approvals where there is, I would say we can be very confident that there is no patient benefit and also that there is patient harm. So if you're going to approve adjuvant sunitinib, then I would say, yeah, the doors are very open to approving Aduhelm, where there's maybe still some chance that a clinical benefit could get borne out over the longer term.
One of the things that you've been very interested in, Aaron, is conflict of interest. And you mentioned a lot of some of your work that has been published and highly cited was in this area. But we can't, I mean, there is no, when you look at the advisory panel here, at least I haven't been able to see anything publicly that there was actual financial conflict of interest pertaining to how this drug was approved. Mm-hmm. How about other scenarios? Have you looked in your research into oncology drugs or oncology agents that have been approved based on surrogate endpoints or based on advisory and ODAC, and have you been able to see a link whether some of the drugs that were approved with a lower bar were related to some conflict of interest pertaining to the advisory council, or has this not been looked at?
I believe that so not from my own work, but others have tried to look at that. I think outside of the oncology sphere, and there's always a little bit of opacity on the data in some situations, or just a small sample size. If you're looking at numbers of approvals, it's a pretty small sample size. But I think to the best of our collective ability to look at this, I don't think there's been. I think I would remember it if there was a very clear clear association between presence of conflicted members on, say, an advisory council and the outcomes. Again, that could be very well be either the absence of such an association or just not enough statistical sample size to make that association. But I think that at least in the current, I understand that it used to be different, but in the current era, the FDA does a fairly good job of at least the kind of the nominal removal of conflicts of advisory council members, voting members who have a conflict with the specific agent or the specific company whose drug is under review. So I think that specific level of conflict with the company, I don't think is something that plays a role in the our current era of FDA decisions.
So let's talk just a little bit about conflict of interest and financial, but as well, I want to talk about the non-financial conflict of interest, if I may. I have a lot of interest in the non-financial conflict of interest, so we'll segue to that a little bit. But so do you really honestly believe that if a company buys me a sandwich, I'm going to prescribe the drug because I got a turkey sandwich over lunch?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, I think that's an empirical
At
question.
least a steak and French fries. Come on.
I think it's an empirical question, and I think it's been answered.
But so take us through that. Take us through how it was answered, and like any investigation, I presume there are certain pitfalls or certain limitations to the investigation. But I'd like to maybe take listeners through that empirical evidence that you mentioned, and just discuss it a little bit, because obviously there are two sides to the story.
Sure. So I recently, my review group and I, or my research group and I, recently published a review in Annals of Internal Medicine that was a systematic review of every paper we could find that studied the association between physicians' receipt of money or something else of financial value, such as a fancy meal, from a drug or device manufacturer, and that physician's prescribing or utilization behavior. And what we found was that over several dozen studies, that association was unanimous. Like, there was not a negative study that we could find. So every study that's looked and said, if Dr. X gets a payment or has previously gotten a payment from this manufacturer, their current and or future utilization of that company's drug will be higher than if they didn't. So that's, though, an association. That's a correlation and not a causation. And I would say that most of the papers that have been published that we reviewed, I would say they could be fairly described as correlative and not causative. Because, for example, if you're not controlling for or adjusting for someone's specialty, then you would say, like, oh, getting payments from Novartis causes you to prescribe more nilotinib, right? But no, like, that association would be there even without causation. They just happen to, of course, they buy more meals to the oncologists who treat CML and hence prescribe nilotinib, even if that getting that meal changes the doctor's behavior zero, and they prescribe just as much nilotinib as they would have previously. Like, you will see that association. So I would say that is part of the association that we see, is like simply the correlation. But then there are some papers that have done that have used more econometric methods and use what's called an event study analysis, where physicians are compared to their own prior behavior. And like across classes now, we're not speaking just oncology drugs. What you see very clearly is when you have data points over, say, 12 previous months, and then you've got a month zero where you center your time course to the date that the physician got the payment or got the meal, which you can see in the open payments database. You see like a very clear bump that goes up for several months after before coming to baseline. So this isn't, so that should be something that should account for what the physician's specialty was, their case mix, which patients they have, the characteristics of their patients, because, within a physician, like, that didn't change from March to April. The only thing that changed for me, Aaron Mitchell, from March to April is whether I got a payment from that company. So I'd say that, there's certainly a lot of correlation there, but when you do a really rigorous and good job, then there's some causation there. And I don't think that you can like look at these time series analyses and come away with any other conclusion that, yep, they got a meal and their prescriptions went up for a few months afterwards.
So two things I want to ask you. And you've been, by the way, very generous with your time, so I promise not to keep you for long, but this is just an exciting topic always. One is, why is there not a lot of discussion or protest or, I don't know, crying out about medical societies receiving payments? And what I mean by that is, we are both members of the American Society of Clinical Oncology. I'm a member of ASH as well, American Society of Hematology. I've done lymphoma, as you know, for a long time. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, I think and I know that ASCO and ASH, they receive millions and millions and millions of manufacturer money, exhibits, and so forth. In fact, it's well known, and it's a part of the revenue and all of that stuff. Yet the same society that receives that millions and millions and millions of dollars hold us sometimes hostage for some of these conflict, even when you submit manuscripts and papers. I guess what I'm trying to get at, why is the conflict of interest blown out of proportion on the individual level as opposed on a society level or organization level? I think they should be held to the same standard.
Yeah, I agree. You're not going to get disagreement from me on that point. I think that if anything, the industry payments not to individual clinicians, even the KOLs among us, but the payments to the institutions that employ us and the professional societies are probably even more substantial in shifting the overall landscape of who's using what drugs, and they're probably even more, I would say, harmful. I'll use that word. Yeah, I think that is absolutely a concern.
How would that impact? Like, do you like? I can't find how does this impact individual patients, because I mean ultimately what we care about is patients. How are these sponsorships on the society level, these big exhibits at meetings, affecting patients? Are you able to link those somehow?
Well, I would say that we know empirically so far that that I'm confident, based on the data we have, that the payments from drug companies influence our prescribing. And so the next question then, or what we're left with, is that, are those prescribing changes in patients' best interests, or are they not? And there's a couple sides to this. The side in patients' interests might be that drug companies are more heavily promoting, their new drugs just onto the market. We've had some good drugs recently. So, for example, to the extent that the manufacturer of nivolumab or pembrolizumab is promoting that drug for appropriate indications for melanoma or for non-small cell lung cancer, then those payments could, in fact, lead to improved outcomes among patients. So that's one argument. Again, I think it has to come back to an empirical question, which is what are the drugs that companies are spending the most resources promoting? And of course, with individual drug exceptions, when you look at the landscape broadly, and I'm thinking now of work done by Joseph Ross at Yale, when you look, it is in fact the drugs that are less innovative and less effective that they have to promote harder. I think we clinicians are maybe a little bit better at naturally jumping on the things that really look the most beneficial. And it's the Me Too drugs, it's the ones that have lower clinical evidence that then, on a per drug basis, more money needs to get spent to promote to us. So if that is more an accurate reflection of where promotional money is going, then I think there's a good chance that promotional spending to doctors is not benefiting patients' care, and in fact could be counterproductive.
Yeah, very provoking thoughts. I do think that something could be looked at a little bit more closely, though. I think there are opportunities to look at that. I want to finish off with something pertaining to the non-financial conflict of interest. I feel, it's easy to track the financial conflict of interest. Although, by the way, I mean, I actually think open payment website is full of flaws. I actually don't check it anymore. When I get the notification, check your thing, I don't, because they've completely messed up a couple of years ago. I called, I protested, I emailed. I'm like, you know what? I don't have time for this. Never got any follow-up back. So I actually don't even check it anymore. But, nonetheless, it's probably the only outlet to ask that question that you're asking. But the non-financial conflict of interest, we can't track it anywhere. Let me just maybe throw an example to you that could maybe provocative. You are a faculty member somewhere at a particular university in the United States. You are a principal investigator on a clinical trial. Phase 2 trial, it took a year and a half to get the trial, getting through the IRB, the sponsorship, all of that stuff. You're very excited. You get a patient comes in the room who is possibly eligible for this. Can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure the way you're going to propose the trial will be that this is a great thing for you if you actually get enrolled in this trial. While we know if we knew it was a great thing for you, there would be no clinical trial. I mean, I think the discussion of benefit and harm is always skewed differently when you are the one who is running the trial, because that trial is going to lead to your promotion. You're going to get the publication. You may get an oral session, oral presentation somewhere. So that might be an important thing for you, and so on. So how do we reconcile that issue?
So I've heard the non-financial conflict of interest concern before. My thinking on that is I'm certainly not the first to make this argument, but it's one that makes sense with, and I would endorse it, which is if we're talking about the process which corrects non-financial conflicts of interest is science. If we are saying that the individual investigators can be let's say blindly adherent to a given hypothesis or in a given trial because of their own interest in it in part, then like, of course, yeah, like for sure. But I think that problem applies not just to oncology, not just to clinical trials, that applies to science more broadly. And certainly not in the short term, but over the long term, I still, at least for one, believe that the long arc of science bends towards truth, because there are enough curmudgeons out there who don't go with the prevailing wisdom and want to conduct a counter trial or something that would they have a different hypothesis and would try and generate evidence to the contrary, which, if hypothesis 1 was incorrect, then they will find, and then that will lead to the discussion and discovery of truth. That's in distinction to financial conflict of interest, which is not balanced by like negative industry funds from somewhere else. It's all in one direction, and it is all geared towards more use of the promoted product, whereas the non-financial conflicts of interest in some cases may support a new drug, but then contrary evidence will emerge to the contrary, and over time will balance out. And so I think that's why I'm less concerned in terms of the long-term course of medicine about the non-financial conflict than I am about the financial conflict that we have with industry.
So yeah, I mean, the non-financial conflict of interest is tricky, because I mean, at the end of the day, also your career is on the line as an academician pertaining to some of these issues pertaining to clinical trials. And frankly, it's very difficult to do clinical trials without getting sponsorship. So I mean, I feel there's a lot of intermingleness right there. It's very easy, when you track direct payments. Direct payments are easy, but there's indirect process. And I also, I would think you would agree that it's very important to collaborate with the pharmaceutical industry, right? I mean, I think, a lot of innovations have come from pharma. I mean, Gleevec, frankly, I would say this was purely pharma. If you look at Rituxan, Herceptin, Avastin, we can name a lot of drugs, the IO therapy and so forth. So you're pro-collaboration, I presume. I don't want to put words in your mouth. You just want to have some limitations or some boundaries to this collaboration?
I think my ideal model of drug development would look substantially different than what we have now. I'm not the first.
So if you're in charge, my last question, you're going to actually comment on that.
Okay.
Last question is, you're in charge of health policy and you can actually make all the changes that you want.
All right. Yes.
So tell me your top 5 agenda items as you're lobbying for the position.
Oh, wait. Okay. I thought we were going to go just on the collaboration angle. You've opened that more broadly to everything.
Yeah, I mean, one of them has to be the collaboration piece.
Okay. So we'll start with the collaboration. So rather than companies sponsoring like directly to in making arrangements directly with institutions, I would support a model, and this is very vague. I know I've not thought through the details as others have, but I have seen it written, and this is a model that seems very appealing to me, which is drug company develops compound with early collaboration from academic scientists. Then turns it over to the FDA and says, FDA, you, with your independent scientists who have never will work with our company, design and run and sponsor the clinical trial that will get this drug approved. Trial design entirely independent from industry is what I would like to see. Entirely independent. So from start to finish, that process happens without industry input. So that's number one. Number two is an easy one. The federal government has to be able to negotiate drug prices with industry. I would say probably more so than just negotiate. They should be able to set drug prices. Number three would be that physician-administered drugs, which are commonly called the Part B drugs within the oncology space, we should no longer get paid on margin for those drugs. We should get a flat fee that should remove the incentive that oncologists currently have, which is to use more expensive drugs because they're more lucrative to us. Gosh, those are my big ones. I haven't even gotten to conflicts of interest yet. Yeah, I would say that we could go straight to to no industry payments to physicians as long as I'm writing the rules. And I'll come back to you on number five.
Okay, so this is your agenda. So ladies and gentlemen, listeners, you have to vote for Dr. Aaron Mitchell if you like this agenda. Let's see how many votes you get.
Unfiltered agenda, entirely unfiltered, but based on the name of the podcast, I feel like this is the place I got to get my agenda out there.
Aaron, this has been great. I really, truly appreciate you taking the time. I want a promise from you that we'll have you back in about 6 or 7 months and talk some more. There's so much we can really talk. It's very difficult to cover this in 1 hour. I feel all of these topics could actually have one item. The one thing I would like to do in the future, I would like to be part of the debate, is the conflict of interest debate, which is, I think that it's a very heated debate, and I've actually moderated a couple of these. And really, I think it will be a fun to have an opposing view to that. But I need to read your paper in the annals. I'll admit I did not read it.
Well, I know that Dr. Vincent Rajkumar has been a recent co-host of yours. So get him on there, get me on there, and I don't know, someone else to maybe represent the other side.
I need to. This will be great.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Aaron. Appreciate taking the time and look forward to having you again.
Yeah. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for the invitation. It was a lot of fun.